Welcome everyone to our lunchtime chat today with Gradlinc, and we have a special guest in the house, Marko Stavrou from Marko Stavrou Consulting. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Zane.
Actually, quite some time that we've been chatting to Marko to get him here. He's a very busy man, and I think that's where I actually want to start the conversation, because we invited all of you to join the webinar today because Marko, he calls himself the Gen Z guy, and if you go on LinkedIn you will see that, and that's actually the first time I came across Marko when I was really intrigued about this whole the Gen Z guy. What does it mean? But Marko, before we get into all the details of what you're doing, please just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope that this is going to be a practical and valuable session, but just a quick overview on why you should be listening to me. I started my first business very young in high school and kind of evolved into a marketing agency, and had overseas working with a lot of personal and company brands, featuring them on podcasts and just in the media and communication space. And that eventually then, led to social media, and I was running my own social media accounts and just involved in that kind of arena. And then after building a business young and, going to events and being the only youngest person there, people start to say, oh, Marko, the young entrepreneur or the young guy who's in marketing. And so that kind of youth, element came through, and I started being invited on stages and to panels and events. And I said, okay, how do I commercialize this? Because, it's great to have a marketing agency, but, there's hundreds in South Africa and thousands across the world, So I wanted that unique value proposition, that unique niche, and, this Gen Z element came up, and I found that there was such a big need. When I do business, I always do it in a reverse manner. Where there's a need, I provide a solution. I don't build the solution first. And so that's where it came through, just clients saying, listen, we're struggling to retain our young talent. We're struggling to sell to young people. We're struggling to, influence students at universities. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let me commercialize this and, just make that claim of, okay, I'm the person to go to when it comes to Generation Z, both because I am 19 years old, and two, because I'm working with both universities and then, corporate and large companies in both capacities.
So that was quite a journey. I want to take just one more step back because I'm quite interested to find out, you started your own podcast when you were 15. What made you start the podcast, and just like the thinking behind? It's a scary thing to put your voice out there. People have opinions and, they want to listen to what you have to say. And what do you have to say? What got you interested in exploring just, a podcast, or just putting yourself out there and facing public opinions and other people perhaps laughing at you as a 15-year-old?
Yeah, so I actually was interning for a podcast agency in the States and was working closely with the CEO and doing as a sales rep and doing a lot of client fulfillment. And so that was kind of my introduction to the podcast space. But besides from that, I was listening to podcasts as a way to upskill and kind of get myself into business. I didn't have a business before that. I wasn't, in corporate. I wasn't going through the system. I was just a high school student. So the only kind of way to actually access information and people was through podcasts. And so I was listening to 5 to 10 podcasts every single day for many years. And trying to gain skills and access and information. And then, of course, working with clients, I'm like, what's the best way to network and to build relationships? Because no one wants to go for coffee with someone who's got nothing to offer, right? So I'm like, all right, cool. Let me set up this platform that at least gives someone a reason to engage with me. And so I did the podcast, and I did really, really well. And eventually what happened was, I was so focused on my business that I said, okay, cool. I don't have capacity for high school and for a podcast and for a business. So I then, ended up stopping the podcast, but continuing the business.
Okay. Yeah. Priorities. Hey. Okay. So tell me, you mostly work on Stavrou Consulting, but you also started something that I think is very very inspiring for young people, called Hustlers Global. Can you tell me a little bit more about where that started and what that is about, for the audience to also understand what you're being up to?
Yeah, so while I was in high school and I was running my marketing agency, I really had no one to go to. My parents weren't entrepreneurs. My grandparents were entrepreneurs, but they were in property. So like to gain information and direct access into how to employ people and how to get contracts and all the facets of business, I had no idea where to go to. So I was just listening to podcasts and reading books, but they don't really give you the practical feedback and insight. And so I then met a young gentleman in my high school and I said, listen, he was keen on entrepreneurship but wasn't involved. I was running my business and said, we need to create a platform that kind of gives practical advice to young entrepreneurs that are wanting to start their own business or to grow their current business. And so we created this platform, which was in the form of a publication. And we did a series of interviews, and we also transcribed some of my podcast interviews into those articles. And eventually, we were getting tens of thousands of people reading the publication because there was no platform in Africa for young people to go to. And then what happened was we then decided, okay, cool, how do we make this more of a real, business, but also like, into reality. And so we started hosting events, and it was basically like a mini YPO for people that don't know YPO, Young Presidents Organization, because they had very extreme requirements to enter. And so we just hosted a series of events, and we've been doing that for the last few years. And obviously my capacity is very limited, so I've stepped away as a director of that business to run Stavrou Consulting. But I think it's just such an important platform and community for young people, both specifically in South Africa and globally, to have that access.
Yeah, no, 100%. I see it in a daily in the startup ecosystem in South Africa. There's really a big need for support in the early stages. And I think even more so for young people, because if you don't come from a family of entrepreneurs or you don't know actually how to do this, it's very difficult for young students, young adults to know where to start. I've got a great idea, but who do I talk to? And I think the fact that there's a newsletter is a fantastic idea. So please keep that up. I think there's a lot of young minds out there. We work with universities now, but I can hear when I talk to them, they're hungry to get going.
And the biggest thing is also, and this will introduce us into our next, set of topics, but young people want to connect to young people, and that's just the way it is. And it will never change. You go through certain seasons of life, and when you're married, you want to connect to other married couples, and you've got kids, you want to connect with other couples who've got kids, and so like that's just the way life is. And so we wanted to create specifically a network around other young people can learn from other young people, instead of me trying to create urgency from a 50-year-old or 35-year-old when I'm 20 to actually meet with me. There's a as much as we can connect, there'll always be that disconnection. And that's the same thing within organizations. As much as we can put in great strategies and much as we can tailor to the different generational needs and the different people needs, there will always be that disconnect as long as people are living different stages of life, which is also totally normal and real. And so I'm never trying to change that, but it's how can we best adapt to everyone's life situations, needs, wants, desires. And so creating stuff around that is what my goal is.
Yeah, I agree with you. We also find it when we are dealing with students, we are not Gen Z right now, and I can see the relatability definitely plays a role. And I'm thinking, in the space of the working environment, it definitely impacts how Gen Zs interview, how they look for job opportunities, how they adjust in the workplace, because you relate to people who go through the same stuff that you go through. And I feel that the gap between, what is expected in the workplace and what Gen Z can bring, I feel like it's been the biggest divide ever between the new incomers and the people looking for the newbies. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you work with companies through Stavrou Consulting. So how do you work with companies? How do you help companies to attract better talent?
So when I initially started, it was in any capacity possible, whether it was events or whether it was HR, whether it was marketing, recruitment. And now it's become very specific and niche. And just because, I really believe that consultants can't be specialists in everything. You have to really understand certain markets from a client point of view, and then even from a strategic point of view, having to test and just kind of being able to over deliver in that. And so, I've really niched down my business and even our services, and we work solely with only two types of clients. And one is that it's in HR divisions and HR people. So that'll be chief people officers and HR directors and talent acquisition specialists in organizations. And that's all around employability, whether it's recruiting them, whether it's retaining them, whether it's post the grad program or series and actually full time, whether that's just with the executive team and kind of sharing some cultural things that they can uplift their strategies internally and giving them different perspectives and doing some kind of reverse mentoring, which is one of the things that I do. Or the other way we work with companies is through their marketing. And so obviously, like if you've got a product business and you're selling energy drinks and you're like, hey, we need to reach B2C young people, or around B2B events, internal clients reaching young people. Like a lot of the banks, I've got all young clients that either use their products or starting to now integrate with their relationship managers. So are helping them kind of create that relationship, but then also communicate with them and retain them. So yeah.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to give the audience an opportunity to voice the questions just now. If you are having any questions and you're joining online, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, wherever you want to. But before I get to those, Marko, I've got a question. You're coming in as a 19-year-old, and you're dealing with people who've been in the workspace for years, and you're telling them how they should be hiring young people. How do you find people treating you? How do they perceive you when you first meet them? I mean, that must be challenging because everybody's got an opinion about Gen Z, and more often than not, it's not the most favorable opinion. But how do you find it, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I'll break that question into two facets. But the first is, obviously it's tough having limited credibility and experience, and that's why I'm on my journey to I was the youngest person to be accepted into any business school, and I've been studying organizational management and people specifically for the last 3 years, and I'm continuing doing my master's. So like I understand that there's a study process that needs to happen, and I believe and I hope that I'm on the forefront of research. So I'm getting access to the best researchers and lecturers and information. So I'm hoping to apply that simultaneously. So I think that's something interesting to note, because I think that sometimes people think, I'm either pulling the information out from nowhere or I'm just reading on social media, like I don't take my data from there, So I think that's the first part of it. And then the second is I do informal joint ventures with other consulting companies, and I leverage, at my advisory board and other consultants, so that my credibility, but then also my execution is at the standard that I want. Because my standard of delivery and excellence is so high, I don't want average results, and I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So bringing in people that have different experiences and skills to add to my value propositions is how I navigate that. And then specifically just around like the stigma around Gen Z. I mean, it's tough because firstly, people either believe, every generation was different and everyone was more conservative than the other. And I think obviously there is some truth to that. But of course, with technology, it's the first time we've had the internet so advanced. It's the first time AI exists. So there are very clear macroeconomic factors and environments that showcase that it's different. There's a different way of the world. And speaking on the question around COVID, it changed everything. You ask, how does it change the workplace? It changed everything because people, they went into, like the stress mentally that they've never experienced such an event before in their lives, and especially Gen Z. So like we've got a lot of work to do mentally, emotionally around that, just dealing with that. That PSD around COVID and masks and health, and young people seeing their parents or their grandparents die. That's it's real stuff that now affects the decisions subconsciously, even if we don't believe consciously, the way we make decisions. So I think it was a huge event. I think it also, specifically in South Africa, accelerated, virtual work and, the internet and delivery. We look at Checker 6060. And I think it would have never done so well the way it's doing now if it wasn't for COVID and people, understanding, I can actually be at home and order, Woolworths to my house and they will actually deliver. Or I can have a meeting on my car over Zoom and, it will actually work and be effective, and my boss wants that. So I think those were some of the macro issues and, changes that I've seen.
Sure. Well, you actually touched on a question that I'm going to pull up on stage here. You kind of already answered, but I just want to go back to it. How has coming into the workplace post-COVID changed the employment landscape for Gen Z? And you talked about it now, but I want to ask from you, what do you think? How did it change from the employer's perspective? Because you talk about people going online. You can have an interview in your car. You're sitting remote, and then yet over time we see that more and more young people are being forced to do 2-3 rounds of interviews at the offices of the employer. So is there just a mismatch between how things have changed and they're going back to the way they were? Who needs to adjust more? Is it Gen Z that needs to adjust to the workplace, how they do things? Or do you think there's massive room, well, that's my personal opinion, for improvement from both sides, but also from companies to say, post-COVID, things are different. Do you find that they are adjusting accordingly? Or how do you find, does it look for the HR recruitment space post-COVID?
So yeah, I think they have adjusted. Most corporates that I work with have adjusted. I think the tertiary education systems are a bit slower to adjust. But in terms of like, if I look at MTN and they don't force any of their colleagues or their workers, employees to go in. It's only for specific meetings, so they can work from home for the whole week. So that's a very interesting take. And then I think the culture there is family first. So if you got a family issue because of what COVID did with health and death and all that, they're like, you switch off the meeting and you go and you help your family member. And I think that culture is like amazing, and it really relates to Gen Z because they're one of their values is obviously their family and their health. So like if you're allowing that to happen, then that's a huge thing. And also that flexibility. So one of the biggest questions I always get asked is, well, on a job description, what are some of the most important things? And you need to be showing Gen Z that flexibility. I'm still amazed, especially around like startups. There's some companies with like 50 to 100 employees, and they literally force their young Gen Z staff to go into the office every day. And every single company that I've worked with or spoken to, the employees are not happy around that. And so it's quite surprising that the corporates have been much more adaptive towards the flexible workspace and then, virtually working in the hybrid versus like a lot of younger companies are like forcing, they have a very stringent, strict culture. And I think Gen Z absolutely hate that. So flexibility around, virtual, but also when to come in. And then actually the ideal day, the ideal amount is 3 days a week. So Gen Z want to come in 2 to 3 days a week in person and the rest virtually online. So if people are, asking that question in their mind.
Okay, so I want to get to one of the questions here, but you're talking about so many things, it sparks more ideas. So I'm going to put it off with one more question that I want to ask you. You're saying, hybrid working 2 to 3 days a week. We're seeing the norm, maybe it's just South Africa, maybe it's international as well. More and more companies are pushing to get people back to the office, and then you have the companies that are really keen on getting remote and they're happy to let them work from home. If you have to tell an HR manager that's insistent on telling you, well, as a Gen Z, where have they deserved to work from home like we did who've been working for 20 years? I know that I'm productive. I know that I bring value to the company. You now new as a Gen Z. I don't know how you work. I don't know if you add value, but the demand, and that's what we've been getting as well sometimes from employers, the demand is for flexibility, and the employers have a pushback to say, well, you got to earn it. How do we drive that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think to say you have to earn to be productive is a bit of a unique. I haven't been conflicted with that as of yet, but I always take it to the bottom line. What are your main objectives? Okay, cool. You want to grow your market share. You want to increase your profit. You want to you want to increase the company's brand. And if you really want those things badly enough, then you're going to make those adjustments and you're going to adapt to the way your workers want. And of course, there's always lines to draw and every team's different. I think that's also something I always say, like every team is different. Every Gen Z is different. You can't categorize them and you can't categorize the team. And, to say that every investment banker versus, creative editor must follow the same set of rules is absurd. Every team and every organization is different. MTN does something a certain way, Standard Bank's investment banking, CIB does something a certain way, another company does another certain way. And so I think you must look internally at what is the overarching culture, but then also what does the team leader want and what does the team want, and then customize to that. So I don't know if that kind of covers it, but I'm happy to chat more around that.
Yes, no, 100%. I think what I love about working with Gen Z on a daily basis is, where everybody sees it as, a certain entitlement that they want to call it, or an attitude. The pushback that we see from Gen Z is really fighting for a stance to be an individual in a society where it's easy to disappear, with social media, and you're just like a number. And I think the biggest fight for Gen Z is to not become a number, because it's so easy to happen nowadays that you lose your individuality. You must just fit in with the system. And the pushback is really forcing employers and industry to think, are we measuring people from 8 to 5? There's this many hours, or are we measuring people on their output and value that they add? And I think that's where the pushback from Gen Z is really valuable for me, because it's saying that maybe you don't have it all figured out. We also have something to add.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see there's some great questions as well that are being asked.
Yeah,
So
I'm bringing
everyone.
bringing the first one up here. Just a quick one with your companies that you've been working with. Do you have a success story?
I trust that by now most of our work is seen in a positive sentiment and getting great results. I mean, it's always hard to, I guess, have very stringent KPIs. But I mean, if I look at our Standard Bank worth and with all their youth clients, we've got amazing results with just adapting their events, adapting their communication towards their Gen Z employees, and also around their app, and just getting the young people to engage with their app. As well as being a great success. And Retroval is a specific marketing agency. We kind of helped them with their graduate program, and they had like an internship, and kind of giving them some of the universities and adapting their descriptions and their LinkedIn posts around that. So I mean, most of the organizations we work with have seen great results, just because I think it's so tactical, it's so specific, it's so strategic. We don't just look at it from a overarching thing. We actually work on the small, details of it, which most HR people, believe it or not, don't have capacity for. They're so just trying to manage their own workload, plus everyone bombarding them with stuff. They never really get to look at the strategic nitty-gritty of it. So just to have someone extra to add to that adds a lot of value. But I'd love to answer. I don't know, the name's not there, but my experience with Gen Z is that they lack the understanding. Maybe you could just pull up that question. My experience with Gen Z is that they lack the understanding and value of delayed gratification.
That's on the chat section. It's not in the Q&A.
Okay,
but you can read it out loud, and then you can talk to the question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, so someone's asked you in the chat, my experience with Gen Z is that they lack the understanding and value of delayed gratification. What can we do to assist Gen Zs on this? So I love this. I love this question and this comment, because Gen Z have got high entitlement. Let's also look at the negatives, right? So, people think I'm all pro Gen Z, and I'm biased, and I'm coming in as like a Gen Z advocate. Not at all. I always do consider the business side, but they come in with a very high entitlement and low resilience. So that's how I like to label it. High entitlement. They expect a great salary. They expect the optimized flexibility, and they want things now, but then they've got low resilience. And also, I find that they're very overconfident. So they say they can do it, or they say they've done the training, but when it actually comes to the job, they're not even close to what the brief said. And so I think that's something to just be aware of as employers and as decision makers around HR, is don't let them be overconfident. Test them. I love companies who do month trials and give them case studies, and let them write, let them speak, really to test their abilities that they say that they have. Because unfortunately, I think university doesn't do a good enough job. They're really good at the theory side, but when it comes to actually real experience and practical skill sets within the working environment, like dealing with clients, like professional communication, like managing conflict, like the systems thinking, just even like being able to solve problems and being a problem solver, not just taking things at face value. These are all things that we assume they have, or potentially they assume they have, but when they actually get into the environment, it's like that is not present at all. So I think those are some things to write down and to really question your candidates and check when looking at them. So how do we deal with, how can we assist them? Well, I think number one is some people have got naturally are more inclined to that. And I always like to ask non-related questions when it comes to that, to figure out how they've been resilient. Like, for example, asking like, what is the longest period of time that you've done a certain activity? Even if it's a sporting activity or if it's a extracurriculum, maybe they've been, they've had their dog, they've been looking after their dog for like 10 years, or they've got a specific like hobby that they do. They've been going to the nursing home or the dog clinic or whatever it may be. Maybe they've been playing semi-professional tennis or whatever it may be. So I think looking at like external personal things that they've achieved around long-term delayed gratification is one of the best ways. And then I think just kind of like looking at their expectations and speaking to that. I think we're so often ignorant to like what it actually takes to be in a business for 20 years and to climb the ladder and to gain experience. And I think just working with them and saying, listen, I know social media is telling you that you can be a millionaire at 20 or 25, or get this nice car or whatever it may be, but actually staying with your parents till 25 and working it out and saving money and, going through a small salary so that you can have the necessary skills and experience and relationships is even more valuable than the money. So I think we because of social media and because of the narrative being pushed to young people, they often are prioritizing the wrong skill sets and learnings. And I had to go through that. I'm not to say that I went through all of this. I was prioritizing, my goals when I was 14, 15 was, how do I become the youngest millionaire in South Africa? And, when I made I remember making my first 150,000 Rand when I was 15, and I thought, the world was mine and I'd made it and I'd done it. And then after you make that money, you realize like what you're missing in terms of from a skills and relationships, and you're just starting. So I think like they don't often know and have gone through that. It's something you have to go through. And so just I always say keep it honest, open, and lots of feedback. Don't wait to give quarterly reports or performance meetings. Give them, if you're not happy with something, tell them there on the spot. They don't like to wait for things. I think those are some things to consider regarding that question.
100%. That's very impressive. I think many people in their 30s, 40s can't say what you achieved at 15. But Marko, I'm gonna put this question up here, but I want to turn it a little bit on its head, because the question is basically saying, it's talking about the gap between millennials or baby boomers and Gen Zs, and how do Gen Zs go around to getting their ideas heard. But we are focusing on HR recruiters at the moment. So can we rather, instead of asking what do Gen Zs need to do to get heard, can we ask you, what do you think HR managers can do to allow Gen Zs to have an opinion? What can we do to better make them feel comfortable, or how can we be more approachable to listen and see what they have to say and not shut them down?
Yeah. So often I speak to both the leaders and to the young graduates, and some of them have got the most incredible bosses and leaders, and they'll say, I love my job. One of them specifically, I know the cultures are really great, is at Investec. So they literally have lined up CAs, people applying to work at Investec, because something that they're doing, and I'm still trying to work out what that is, both is it, obviously they get paid really well, but something in that culture is that the young people are willing to work over time to deliver for their bosses. And so I think that comes to like that individual leaders, both the organization hiring amazing just people that young people can connect to, have admiration for, respect, be influenced, and really want to do well for the team. And that's something I always say is the people in the business are often more important than the assigned work. So the team that you're assigned Gen Z to are often more important than the actual work that they do. Because if they connect to the people and die for the people, then they will often stay in a job that they don't like just because they love their team and they respect that environment. And so I think prioritizing the people and the culture around that can be even more valuable than how much they get paid. I think a lot of them are willing to sacrifice pay. They understand that. But they're not willing to do it if they got a really crap boss, and they're feeling like, every day is a struggle. So I think, yeah, I think we need to just create amazing leaders and culture around that. And I think mentorship programs do really well at, if you link certain line managers to young people, and they have that rapport, and they're meeting for coffee in an informal environment, or they're playing paddle tennis together, or whatever it is, maybe they're going through running clubs or cycling, then I think those are great ways to just start by, and that's why I think understanding their psychometric profiling around your employees and then the employers, and linking the correct people. And that's why often what happens in grad programs is they'll work for multiple different teams within an organization or within another organization as well, so that they can see where they're best suited and who they actually connect with. Because often when you get to a certain level, they've got the skill set, but it's whether they actually connect as a team. And as they mature as well, that is more important.
Yeah, so you're talking about culture and about teamwork. So the very first exposure that a student or graduate will have with a company is in the job description. So if we go to a little bit of the practical side of a job description, we see jobs posted on a daily basis. And I think probably 70-80% of those job descriptions do not, I don't blame Gen Zs if they don't apply for the job, but I have my reasons. In your opinion and your experience with graduates, Gen Zs at the moment, what stands out in a job description, or why would they apply for something? Or even if you just want to look from the HR recruiter's perspective, what do you think should be in a job description to make it attractive for a graduate to actually want to work for the company?
So yeah, what I'm about to say is all studies-based. Studies have come up around this. I think the first thing I've seen just within South African companies on LinkedIn specifically is just the lack of details. I think that's, for multiple reasons. One being, you don't want your competitors to see and use you as a price comparison. Or two is just the vulnerability and the openness. If someone sees a certain price and they immediately turned off and you won't even consider it. But I think that's where we need to change the way we look at that, around just being honest up front. Don't lead someone on when you're going to, if the job description says 15K a month, and the person's looking for 30, and then you're only telling them on the third interview, then you've wasted your time and their time, because the chance that they're actually going to accept that, or at least be satisfied with that, is very limiting. So I think just from a studies point of view, the first is financial. So they're definitely looking at the financial number from a remuneration point of view. And then two is then the flexibility. So how often do they have to come and work? And then what does that look like from a virtual versus in-person point of view? And then lastly is the growth opportunities. So it's a bit hard to communicate, how is this person actually going to grow in the organization? But it is very important, because if the person doesn't see a future there from a partnership and long-term perspective, then they're going to just come in for the short-term incentives, or to just leverage the company for experience. And I think that's what we need to change our mindsets around. Let's not hire people as though they're replaceable, but let's partner with people's lives and their families and their passions. And if you do that, then the person will stay with you much longer. And I think companies do that really, really well. It's just a lack of communicating that. And I think that's where I come in from a marketing side and say, listen, let's document what the company is doing. Let's showcase the sustainability and all the social causes that they are solving, because none of the Gen Z see that. It's not on your guys' website. It's not on your guys' briefs. It's not in your guys' teams. It's not in your guys' office. But we know that you guys are doing that work. Remind them that you're doing that. Remind them that they're working towards a bigger purpose than just to increase the share price of the company.
Yeah. So tell me, if I see a job description, no salary, and it's full time in the office, is that like a deal breaker for many young graduates to say, well, no, I'm not even interested to apply?
Yeah, I think just the lack of detail is yeah, I mean, you're trying to figure, those are forefront things in your mind, and then when you don't see them, the reputation of the company may be so great, but it's the specific details immediately okay, cool, I'm not sure about this. Let me rather look at other options. So I think with the competitive landscape being so high for top talent, now I'm not saying for any talent, I'm saying if you really want to get great talent and people that are really like, those are the things they're going to be looking for. And I think just on the comment here around the chat, in my experience, a good job description needs to contain not only requirements from the candidate, but what the benefits would be working at the company versus another company, a clear salary range, information about the company culture. So yeah, that's what I mean. I think that just speaks onto, what I've said, but then also it goes beyond the what the job description says, and that's where subconscious marketing comes in. And both from a science point of view, from a reputation point of view, from a video point of view, like if you look at Apple and Tesla, I can tell you now they're not struggling with getting incredible talent, especially in the States, because people want to work for those companies. Even Discovery right now, Discovery Bank is doing, like, if I look at the talent and the people and the programs they got there, it's unbelievable because people really want to work for that company. So I think we need to get away from like chasing top talent and creating a culture and a company and a marketing around that people need to come to us. And we really do believe that we've got that. And if you start hiring, top 8 talent and game-changing people, then other game-changing people will want to be there as well. And I think it's just like an environment and a cycle that happens. But if your company is constantly churning and has a high staff turnover and never can actually hold great people, then the chances that you're going to create momentum around that is going to be really difficult.
Yeah, I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying is that the leverage or the power that companies used to have in the negotiation during interview is slowly shifting. And even though we are dealing with youth unemployment, graduates are still picky because they are looking for certain things and they are standing their ground to say, I'm not going to do A, B, or C the way you've always done it because I have my values and there's certain things that I also need out of this. It's not just you that's got the power.
Yeah, and I think because of what the internet's done when it comes to both the gig economy and starting a business, I mean, my first business cost me less than 10,000 Rand to start and run operationally for many months. So the fact that I can do that and have access to clients overseas and access to jobs just makes it that much difficult. And I think, if we look at all South Africans immigrating, just showcases, we're actually competing on a global stage. And with AI and metaverse and virtual reality, which I'm also, quite intact with, it's going to become even more so prevalent in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. So if we can just, you don't have to come with top 5 things, but 1 or 2 things. If we have to tell employers, when you are recruiting graduates, what should they know about Gen Z employees? What is it important? What do we need to tell them? What do we need to educate them about?
So I think the first thing is, the first question I always ask in workshops and when I engage with people is, who are Gen Z? And it's quite scary to find out that most executives don't actually know who Gen Z are. They think they're millennials or they think they're Gen Alpha, and there's no real clarity. So there isn't an exact defined point. There's many suggestions, but essentially it's people born from 1995 to 2010. And so just understanding who those people are so that we label them correctly and kind of have an understanding. And then also it's less about the dates, but more so we call them alarming events that have happened. So what are the events that have defined Gen Z and their characteristics? And so we look at the 2008 crash, which was a big thing. And, Gen Z's parents went through that, Gen X. So that obviously affects the way they see financial, their stability, but also their own, families. And there's I saw, from a stats point of view, a lot of Gen Z are wanting to support their families coming out of COVID. And, in South Africa, we've got black tax. And so like people having to really look beyond themselves because the environment from an economic point of view is so tough. So I think that's something to consider, is the person is looking beyond themselves. And then obviously these events they're dealing with, one being 2008 crash, another being COVID, and also growing up with the internet changes everything. You basically can reach anyone on LinkedIn and email in the world. That changes the way you see life. The fact that you can be a freelancer for multiple companies at the same time, and that's another way of looking at the world differently. And so I think that's both obviously have their positive elements, but also their negative. And so I think considering that is very important. And I mean, I mentioned some of them before, like being honest, open, and giving direct feedback early. The team is more important than the desired work. Short-term incentives. If you're going to give bonuses, I still don't really agree with like, giving bonuses only after a year. I'd rather break that bonus up and give them, quarterly, 3-4 times a year, or even sooner, because the more they get that direct access, even recognition and performance, and get all of that type of stuff, just make it sooner. Don't wait so long. And obviously it's tough as a business being on the opposite side, which is the business owner or the shareholder, because to actually plan cash flow and all that type of stuff, it's really tough. So it's kind of like a balancing act between those both. But I think a lot of companies are getting it right. So I think it is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Marko, we've got 5 minutes left. So I've got one more question up my sleeve, and then I'll see if there's any more questions in the chat or anything from your side. But I would like to know, what is your take on recruiters using your grades as a measure of hiring top talent? In your experience or in your opinion, is that still relevant?
So I think yes and no. I think we overvalue what people have studied, and specifically if they've come from Stellenbosch or if they've come from Stanford, and undervalue experience and skills and practicality of what the people have to offer now, not future value as well. Can the Gen Z employee communicate and do public speaking now? Can they do systems thinking now? Have they got the accounting background now? So there's also that thing of like future value. So I think, yeah, no, in that respect, that we mustn't overvalue it. But yes, in the respect that I think if we just look at their ability to just communicate and write emails or do reporting, it's quite crazy what technology has done with like, grammar and, just like the automations people use. They can't spell, they can't write, they can't communicate properly. And so looking at someone who's getting like an A for English, for example, I think does matter. And high students, what I think what's more important about what a high grade say is less around the grade itself, but more about the person. So do they have the ability to be disciplined and study? Do they have the ability to go through hard challenges and hardships, because it's tough to get good marks and it's tough to do difficult degrees. So I think all of the external EQ and SQ factors of that are more important to consider than at face value about what the grade is, or what the degree is. So I think those are the way that I would look at it.
Yeah, I think you get back to the value of an individual. There's more to someone that is a 50-60% on average, but they perhaps have other soft skills, or they perhaps have some work experience that the one with 90% doesn't. So they might be more employable at that point in time.
And I think just hunger, hunger is something you can't really teach. Either someone has urgency for the job and to learn and to grow and to adapt to the company, or they're going to be a complainer and a loser who says, oh, I'm not happy about this and I'm not happy about that, and I'm not willing to adapt to the company culture, and I'm not willing to do this, and I haven't gone through this challenge. So like, just hiring good people is also a skill. And sometimes what happens with companies is we're such in a rush, or we don't have the budget, that sometimes we compromise for that. And that's more in like, sales jobs and in different ways. So I think that's like, some of the things that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to the last slide here, Marko. I've got about a minute and a half left before we're being cut off. If anyone is joining here, please get in touch with Marko. There's an email here. He's big on LinkedIn. If you just Google or find his name on LinkedIn, you'll find him easily. If you're on Gradlinc, there's a QR code if you want to find out more about what we are doing. But Marko, if I can give you 30 seconds, what is your final thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, firstly, thank you to everyone who joined. I hope this was really valuable, and your guys' feedback is always great. So yeah, I would love to continue the conversation in email. And then, I think secondly is starting small is better than nothing. So I think like just taking the time to review what you've got is great. And then also get a reverse mentee. I mean, if you're right now and you're an older gentleman or older lady and you're running a business, or find someone young that you really connect to and just get data from them. you don't have to do what they say, but that data will influence your decisions in a positive way. And so I think that's just something that can be really, really practically helpful for the person right now.
Thank you, Marko. That leaves us with exactly 10 seconds left. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure we'll be seeing lots more of you, and all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you for having me.